and welcome to This Is What Came Out of Me, a series about anything and everything, but mostly movies, TV, books, podcasts, and YouTube. I'm SierraKiloBravo. Let's get into it. These lines were written in late September. The writing of them followed close on an automobile trip to Liege, through a district blasted by war and corrugated with long trenches where those who died with their boots on still lie with their boots on. So starts Paths of Glory, a book that I read by mistake. How did I read a book by mistake, I hear you ask? Well, you might have heard of a 1957 Stanley Kubrick movie of the same name, starring Kirk Douglas. The 1957 movie called Paths of Glory is based on a 1935 book called Paths of Glory, written by Humphrey Cobb. I found a book called Paths of Glory online, written by a gentleman named Cobb, and as a bonus, it was part of the Gutenberg project, so it was free. So I downloaded it and started to read. The 1957 movie called Paths of Glory, based on the 1935 book called Paths of Glory, written by a gentleman named Cobb, is about a group of French soldiers in World War I who refused to continue a suicidal attack. And so I started to read the book Paths of Glory, written by a gentleman named Cobb, but immediately noticed that this book called Paths of Glory, written by a gentleman named Cobb, was in fact a different book called Paths of Glory, written by a different gentleman named Cobb. Confused? Well, it took me a minute too. It turns out that there are two books called Paths of Glory, both written by a gentleman called Cobb. One, a 1935 novel by Humphrey Cobb, that was later turned into a Stanley Kubrick movie. The second, a 1915 non-fiction book by Irvin Cobb, covering life just behind the front lines. This was the one that I had got my hands on. Even though I picked up the wrong book, I continued reading because what I had picked up was very, very interesting. What caught my interest early on was that this was written in 1915, when the war was still new. Not only that, but it's written by an American journalist on the German side of the lines. I had been expecting it to be from the Allies' side, but in 1915, it was 2 years before America joined the war, so Cobb and his fellow journalists were free to see the German side without them being seen as an enemy. And I guess that was one of the weird things that struck me with this book. One minute, Cobb was welcomed as a friend and shown all sorts of things from experimental guns, hospitals, and destroyed towns, whereas a couple of years later, he would have been executed as a spy. Humans are indeed weird. It's also fascinating in that it is a genuine first-hand view of the early days of the war. These days, books about World War I are told by historians, but here was someone at times literally on the front line, reporting what he's seeing with his own eyes. Whether it's watching from an observation balloon a French charge fail in its attack, or chatting with British prisoners of war, or being amazed at the sight of an aeroplane, the book engages on a number of levels. There was one particular section that I can recall even now. Cobb was in Belgium and seeing it as normal as they walked around. But then as they paused and paid more attention, they began to notice small things, the lack of young men, intensive gardening, and in the midst of outdoor dining, a young child collecting coins for freshly minted widows and orphans. So, in a nutshell, this is a really, really good book. And if you have an interest in history or World War I, then it's a must read. I think it would be rather unique among books on the war. The best thing is that as it's part of the Gutenberg project, it's available for free to download and read. I'll put a link in the show notes. Well, that's all for this time. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, be excellent to each other. I'm SierraKiloBravo, and this is what came out of me.